Hi there, and welcome to a special edition of the Studyclix Podcast. We've teamed up with an expert teacher, Peter Tobin, to bring you a limited podcast series all about Othello, the play by William Shakespeare.
Peter has recorded a series of podcasts for us where he goes into the specific aspects of what you need to know about Othello when you're studying it for the Leaving Cert. He covers everything from characters and different themes in the play to understanding Shakespeare's writing techniques and tips on approaching exam questions.
This episode of the podcast series is about the key scenes in the play. Having a good understanding of the play itself and the importance of certain scenes is key to obtaining a high mark in your exam. In total, Peter's going to talk about 6 key scenes in Othello, starting with Act 1, Scene 1.
So, the next voice that you'll hear is Peter's. Enjoy listening.
In order to be successful in your single text response on Othello, you need to have a good knowledge of the play itself, how those acts and scenes work together, and be able to identify when the key moments are and the order that they come in. Now, the opening scene of Othello is crucial for a number of different reasons. Firstly, it introduces the character of Iago and his brilliance for scheming, as well as his deep hatred for Othello. In this scene, Act 1, Scene 1, we see that Iago is a part of, and yet also apart from, the action. He's the architect, the facilitator, but he also tries to keep to the sidelines. In this scene, he's encouraging Rodrigo to wake up Brabantio, Desdemona's father, with the news that she has eloped or run away with Othello. Now, while this is technically true, the language in which this news is delivered is really important for us to focus on because it reflects Othello's standing or his status in Venetian society as a black man. Some key aspects of the play are put forward in this scene. Iago makes plain his feelings towards Othello. He is resentful that Othello has chosen Cassio to be his lieutenant rather than Iago himself. He thinks that he deserves the position. He says, "I know my price. I am worth no worse a place." We also see that his supposed loyalty to Othello is simply a game so that he can serve his turn upon him or get revenge on him. Rodrigo, who is much less subtle, hates Othello and says he would rather be his hangman than serve him. Rodrigo also refers to Othello as thick lips, betraying his feelings about Othello's race. So this scene allows us to get glimpses of Iago's character as well. He's clearly manipulating Rodrigo. He's using his money while trying to placate him and get him to do his bidding. He makes clear that he's plotting against Othello, and he gives us some insight into his ideas about loyalty and why he's doing what he's doing. He says about Othello, "In following him, I follow but myself." He also shows full understanding that what he is doing is very wrong and that he must keep all of his feelings a secret. He says, "I am not what I am." Iago also uses highly racialized language when talking about Othello. He shocks and offends Brabantio by telling him that an old black ram is tupping his white ewe, and that if he doesn't do something quick, the devil will make a grandsire or a grandfather out of him. Now, this language is designed to provoke Brabantio, but it's also to show something of Iago's character. He really doesn't feel anything towards Othello. He doesn't feel loyalty. He doesn't feel friendship. And because of this, the loyalty that we see him pretend to have is actually a danger to Othello in Venice. Iago continues prodding Brabantio, but also discrediting both Othello and Desdemona in the eyes of the audience. Now remember, we have not met these characters, so the only thing that we have to go on is what we hear from the other characters, in particular Iago, Rodrigo. So Iago discredits Othello and Desdemona by telling them, and Brabantio, that his daughter is being covered by a Barbary horse, and that Desdemona and Othello are making the beast with 2 backs. But then Iago escapes before he can be identified as being involved. He encourages Rodrigo, he builds him up, and then he disappears into the shadows when the lights come up. He says that this is because, though I do hate him, as I do hell pains, yet for necessity of present life I must show out a flag in sign of love. Essentially, he doesn't want to be open in his scheming and be seen to hate Othello, because he wants to be able to manipulate everybody. After Iago exits, Brabantio returns with the knowledge that Desdemona is not in her bed at home, and he says that Othello must have bewitched her. He claims that he's been betrayed, and he even says that he wishes that Rodrigo, who he sent away from the house before for trying to woo Desdemona, he says that he wishes Rodrigo had had her, because at the very least, Rodrigo is white. So this scene functions well in the structure of the play in a number of ways. Shakespeare is excellent at creating a world that is already in motion, and we feel that with the opening lines here, we have simply stumbled into these characters' world while it's still going. This is a dramatic technique that makes the world of the play feel more real to the audience, and it brings us straight into the action. There is no explanation, no big exposition. We learn what we learn about Othello and Desdemona from what the other characters have to say about them. We also have our first introduction to Iago and the level to which he will go in his scheming. And one of the key quotes to remember from Act 1, Scene 1 is Iago's immortal lines, "I am not what I am."
The next scene that Peter's going to discuss is Act 1, Scene 3, another key scene in the play.
In this scene, Act 1, Scene 3, we see Othello, Brabantio and Desdemona in front of the Duke of Venice. Brabantio, convinced that Othello has used witchcraft to bewitch his daughter, is asking the Duke to do something to stop the marriage. Again, like Rodrigo and Iago in the very first scene, Brabantio's language is highly racialised. It underlines Othello's status as an outsider. He is convinced that Othello must have drugged or cast a spell on Desdemona because to him their marriage is unnatural. He says, "She is abused, stolen from me and corrupted by spells and medicine." Now this theme is repeated, and it's an important one for us to pay attention to. This idea that white Desdemona is perfect and black Othello is devilish or evil, and that their marriage is unnatural. Brabantio himself says that for them to marry is for nature so preposterously to err, for nature to be wrong. By the end of the play, we see that Othello himself begins to believe this idea too. Now, regardless of what the Duke or the other senators think privately of the marriage, once the Duke finds out that they are in fact married, he tells Brabantio that there is nothing more that they can do about it and that he needs to just deal with it. We see that Desdemona loves Othello for who he is. Othello himself says, "She loved me for the dangers I had passed." Her love for Othello, then, is for who he is and what he has done in life. It could be said to be a true love. On the other hand, Othello's love for Desdemona is based on how she relates to him. So he said, "She loved me for the dangers I had passed," and he says, "and I loved her that she did pity them." So this love, therefore, could be said to be less constant than Desdemona's, and it could be the first hint at what is to come later in the play in terms of the breakdown in their relationship. Similarly, there is another moment of foreshadowing in this scene that hints at what comes later as well. After Othello has agreed to go to Cyprus to prepare the Venetian defences against the Turks, Brabantio tells Othello, "Look to her more if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived her father and may thee." Now this is the planting of a seed that Iago intends to water, and it also provides us with a way of looking at Desdemona that allows us to see her from an Elizabethan perspective. She has really betrayed her father, and the conventions of her society, the rules that women have to follow in Venetian society. Most likely the only reason why more of a fuss wasn't made by the Duke and the senators is because they need Othello to win their war against the Turks. Finally, this scene closes with Iago's soliloquy. If we were in any doubt about Iago's intentions or his character before now, the close to this scene underlines it. He says, "I hate the Moor." And one reason that he gives for this is because he suspects Othello has slept with his wife Emilia. We see the beginnings of his plot here to cause a rift between Othello, Cassio and Desdemona, and he closes his soliloquy with a rhyming couplet. He says, "Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to light." This scene is important then for a number of reasons. It's the first time we see Othello and Desdemona together. We get a sense of Othello standing in Venice. We see how he is despised by some for his colour, but admired by some for his abilities as a general. Desdemona too stakes her claim for freedom from her father, and Shakespeare also uses this scene to foreshadow important events that occur later in the play. Ultimately, this scene gives us Iago's first soliloquy, and it is here that we see him in his true colours. Gone is the witty banter and humour, and it is replaced with a sharp bitterness and quiet rage. And finally, an important quote to remember from Act 1, Scene 3 is Brabantio's warning to Othello, "Watch her more if thou hast eyes to see, she hath deceived her father, and may thee."
The third key scene Peter is going to talk about is Act 2, Scene 3. Where Iago plots to get Cassio drunk in order to tarnish his reputation.
In this scene, Act 2, Scene 3, Iago, knowing that Cassio has an intolerance to alcohol, plans to get Cassio drunk and then arrange it so he gets in a fight. Now, this is done to destroy Cassio's reputation and his standing with Othello. The plan works to perfection. Cassio drinks too much, he becomes quarrelsome and arrogant, and ends up fighting with Montano, whom he wounds. Meanwhile, Iago has sent the ever-present Rodrigo to go out and cry a mutiny, basically wake everybody up in the town, and Othello is brought from his bed with Desdemona in tow to resolve the situation. Othello is shocked
that Cassio has been the one to forget himself, and despite Iago's apparent attempts to defend Cassio, Othello strips him of his title and pushes him from his company. So here Iago has achieved a goal. Cassio has been stripped of the position that Iago thought should be rightfully his, but instead of rejoicing and celebrating, he is not satisfied. He pushes things further. In his attempt to console Cassio, he suggests that Cassio should focus on Desdemona in his efforts to get Othello to reinstate him, that it is Desdemona who holds sway over Othello's decision-making. Our general's wife is now the general. This moment moves Iago's plot from bitterness about being overlooked for a promotion to something much more sinister. This scene is also important because we see Othello's judgment being questioned by others for the first time in a serious way. Montano, after the fight, says to Iago, "'Tis great pity that the noble Moor should hazard such a place as his own second with one of ingraft infirmity." There's also the discussion on reputation in this scene, and we see Iago as an arch plotter. He is whatever he needs to be to whoever he is speaking to at the time. And when he is trying to implicate Cassio further by apparently defending him, he says, "Touch me not so near, I had rather have this tongue cut from my mouth than it should do offence to Michael Cassio." There is yet another element to this scene that is important to note too. Throughout the play, there is a question over the consummation of Othello's and Desdemona's marriage. The act of consummation, the husband and his new wife having sex for the first time, was important because it legitimised the marriage. In many cultures, and certainly in Elizabethan England, the bedding ceremony was important, where witnesses either put the bride and groom to bed or observed the bride and groom in bed. In many cases, a marriage could be legally cancelled or annulled if it hadn't been consummated. This topic is a matter of great debate in academic circles, with many critics arguing that it's simply impossible that Othello and Desdemona didn't consummate their marriage. But it doesn't appear in the play, and in fact it's not referenced. Indeed, the only time that they could have consummated their marriage, Othello was called from his bed to attend to some crisis, just like in this scene. So this scene serves as a reminder then of Iago's plotting and scheming, as well as an exhibition of Othello and Desdemona's fragile relationship. The question around the consummation of their marriage is an important one, and perhaps this is part of the reason why Othello was so consumed by jealousy. To be married to a woman, but not yet slept with her, and then to find out that another man has taken her virginity while she was married to you, all of these could be factors in how consumed Othello becomes by jealousy. And a key quote here is Iago's, "So will I turn her virtue into pitch, and out of her own goodness make the net that shall enmesh them all."
The next scene you'll hear Peter talking about is Act 3, Scene 3, where lots of key moments occur that are pivotal to the plot of the play.
This scene, Act 3, Scene 3, opens with Cassio appealing to Desdemona to help him get back in Othello's good books, and Desdemona assuring Cassio that she will do anything and everything she can to help him. Iago and Othello arrive as Cassio is leaving, and Iago utters those famous words, "Ha, I like not that." 5 short words that then plant the seeds of jealousy and suspicion in Othello's mind, and then this scene will end with Iago agreeing to murder Cassio and asking Othello to allow Desdemona to live. What happens in between the beginning and ending of this scene is a masterclass in manipulation, plotting and deception. Iago's true genius in this scene is to make Othello feel like it is he who is forcing Iago to speak his mind. Iago lays little hints and traps, and Othello follows the trail naively. Iago says it couldn't have been Cassio with Desdemona because Cassio wouldn't have snuck off so guiltily when seeing Othello. When Desdemona then confirms it was Cassio a short time later, she is damning herself without even knowing it. Similarly, by speaking on Cassio's behalf so forcefully, she is making matters much worse. This is evidence of Iago's capabilities. He tells Cassio to plead his case to Desdemona if he wants to fix things with Othello, knowing that Desdemona is the type of person to try to help. Everything Desdemona does then to help Cassio is further proof for Iago to show Othello that Desdemona is having an affair with him. Iago is using Othello and Desdemona's very nature against them. Desdemona is kind and helpful, specifically because she thinks that helping Cassio and Othello repair their relationship will be good for her husband. Othello is naive and inexperienced with women and Venetian society more generally, and so he doesn't know how deceitful people can be. The big irony here, of course, is that the person he is trusting, the person who is telling him how deceitful people can be, is himself being deceitful. And of course, while Iago is delivering these lines, it is Shakespeare, the playwright, who is structuring the events in this way. And it's a wonderful example of dramatic irony to see Desdemona so forcefully pleading for Othello to repair relations with the man who Iago is telling Othello she's having an affair with. Shakespeare also makes great use of repetition and questioning in this scene. Othello asks Iago a series of questions. Is he not honest? And what dost thou think? And to each of these questions, Iago repeats it. Honest, my lord, and think, my lord. The effect here is to make it seem as if Iago is reluctant to answer or that he's stalling for time. It also has the effect of focusing the audience's attention on what his answer might be, which in turn forces us to focus further on Othello's reaction, which of course is one of frustration. Think, my lord, by heaven thou echoest me, as if there were some monster in thy thought too hideous to be shown. By the end of this scene, Othello is firmly of the opinion that Desdemona is unfaithful. This could be an example of either Iago's skill or Othello's naivety. There are also lots of goings and returnings just at the moment when Othello appears to have dismissed the idea. Iago redoubles his efforts, making reference to the fact that Desdemona deceived her own father and that in marrying Othello she erred from nature. This scene is also interesting from the perspective that Othello begins to see himself as other, as something different. This scene is important then structurally at the point at which Iago ramps up his plotting and his scheming. And the most important quotation from Act 3, Scene 3 are those words of Iago, "Ha, I like not that."
In Act 4, Scene 1, with the help of Iago's master manipulation skills, Othello becomes utterly convinced of Desdemona's betrayal.
At the end of Act 3, Scene 3, Iago is trying to convince Othello to spare Desdemona's life. By the end of Act 4, Scene 1, this scene, he is trying to convince Othello to strangle her in her bed. This scene centres around the handkerchief and it being proof of Desdemona's betrayal of Othello. The handkerchief itself is an important symbol. We were told earlier of the handkerchief's importance, it's a family heirloom, and that the red strawberries on the white material were dyed with the blood of virgins. This is symbolic of fidelity, but also reminiscent of another element of the bedding ceremony, the display of the bridal sheet stained with blood to prove the bride's virtue, that she was a virgin when she married. So the handkerchief then carries with it many implications. Othello, believing Desdemona has given it away, may also think she has given her virginity away to Cassio and not to him, her husband, assuming that their marriage is as yet unconsummated. It also represents a bond between them. It was a token of his feelings towards her, and she has disposed of them in a careless and reckless manner. While there is a lot of plotting and scheming evidence in this scene, there's also a great deal of luck. Iago contrives to have Othello concealed within hearing distance while he talks to Cassio about Bianca. Othello, believing he is talking about Desdemona, sees all this as evidence and proof. Of course, Cassio's casual and disrespectful way of talking about Bianca, indicating that he sees her as no more than a prostitute and would never hope to marry her or be in a serious relationship with her, enrages Othello, as he believes that he's talking about Desdemona. After a time, Bianca herself arrives on stage, and this could very well ruin Iago's plans, but instead it turns into an incredible piece of good fortune. Bianca is waving the handkerchief, demanding that Cassio tell her who gave it to him. Of course, to Othello, already driven insane with jealousy and suspicion, this is just further proof. He's so consumed with his feelings that he has an epileptic fit and he passes out. The rest of the scene then concerns Othello making up his mind about achieving justice through taking Desdemona's life, Iago convincing him to strangle her in her bed, even the bed she hath contaminated, and then Othello striking Desdemona in front of Ludovico. Now that part is particularly interesting because, as with some of the other key scenes, Shakespeare's structure is important. While Ludovico, Othello and Desdemona are talking, it appears as if there's more than one conversation happening at the same time. In fact, similar to earlier in the scene with Cassio, Iago and Bianca, it appears that Othello is now reading what he wants into the words he hears coming from Desdemona. He is utterly convinced now, and he no longer really needs persuading from Iago. Othello striking Desdemona is a breaking point, another mini-climax in the play. Ludovico himself says it would not be believed in Venice, and Desdemona is adamant that she has not deserved this. After Othello agrees to be sent back to Venice, we spy some sort of hope that Othello and Desdemona may be able to escape Cyprus and Iago repair their relationship, but immediately after Othello exits the scene, Iago sets to work deepening the plot with Ludovico, eventually concluding that he has been deceived with Othello. So this scene again works to show how far Othello has gone in his misunderstanding with Iago, constantly there to prod him or point him in the wrong direction. Shakespeare creates a wonderful sense of a man slipping from his sanity as Othello mistakes innocent conversation for proof of his wife's adultery. Othello has also slipped in his status. Ludovico believes that he has been mistaken in thinking Othello a nobleman. Everything is really starting to fall apart for Othello, and Iago's words to Ludovico, that he wishes that all that he did to Desdemona was hit her, foreshadow what comes at the end. And one of the key quotes here to establish how much Othello's reputation has been damaged is Ludovico saying, "Is this the noble Moor whom our full senate call all in all sufficient?"
Finally, you'll hear Peter talking about Act 5, Scene 2, the final scene in the play.
In Act 5, Scene 2, the final scene, we see Othello approach the sleeping Desdemona with his mind made up that she must die. This scene proceeds as one that is full of miscommunication, missed opportunities and misunderstandings. Essentially, it is a scene full of drama and befitting the end of a tragedy. Desdemona attempts to defend herself against Othello's accusations, but Othello doesn't listen. Similarly, Emilia makes attempts to defend her mistress, but it doesn't work. Iago has worked Othello into such a state that he cannot be talked down. Even when Desdemona expresses shock that Cassio is dead, and she is now unable to deny the accusations, Othello takes it as just further proof of her infidelity. Much of the drama in this part of the scene stems from the offstage action. Emilia is trying to get into the room to prevent maybe what is happening, and Othello converses both with her, with himself, and with Desdemona at the same time. It's a collection of voices that together heighten the tension. After Desdemona's death, Emilia enters the room and she accuses Othello. Emilia is one of the few characters to directly confront and challenge Othello, and this scene is testament to her loyalty to Desdemona. Shakespeare's use of questions and dramatic irony is in evidence throughout the play as well, and no more so than in this scene. When she gets a sense that Iago is involved, she repeatedly says, "My husband," which is reminiscent of Iago himself using questions to tangle up Othello's mind. "Honest, my lord? Think, my lord?" Here, however, Emilia's questions, or Emilia's statement, "my husband," serves the opposite purpose. They begin to unravel the confusion rather than deepen it. Finally, Iago's role is beginning to come to light, and it's his own wife who is doing it. When confronted, Iago's statement is plain and simple. "I told him what I thought, and told no more than what he found himself was apt and true." Now, this is clearly a lie, but it's interesting that he refuses to deny what has gone on. Iago here leans on custom, that a wife should obey her husband in all matters, hoping that she will just shut up and go away. But again, in honour of her dead mistress, she refuses to obey convention or her husband. She says, "I will not charm my tongue, I am bound to speak." She feels duty-bound here to speak for Desdemona, who can no longer speak for herself. Finally, when Othello begs Cassio to ask Iago why he hath thus ensnared my body and soul, Iago says, "Demand me nothing, what you know, from this time forth I never will speak word." The rest of the scene works to reveal what's left of the plot, the lamentations of Othello and the shock of the Venetian nobleman. There are also some key lines that can be very useful to sum up some of the characters. Lodovico, for example, says of Othello, "O thou Othello, thou was once so good, fallen in the practice of a cursed slave." Now, the way that Iago finishes the play, what he says, "Demand me nothing, I will no longer speak," this is quite a shocking way to end the play, because it denies the audience a simple fix, a reason as to why he did what he did. Instead, Shakespeare forces us to look inwards, to examine ourselves, to maybe see that Iago isn't so different to us. Instead of being truly evil, he is in fact tragically human.
That concludes this episode of the Othello Podcast Series on Studyclix. To echo what Peter said at the top of the podcast, to do well on the Leaving Cert question on Othello, it's important that you have a good knowledge of the play itself and are able to identify and talk about the key moments.
Keep listening to this series for more analysis on the play Othello. It'll help you gain a better understanding of the play and will equip you with the knowledge on how to approach a Leaving Cert question based on this play by William Shakespeare.
Thank you for listening so far, and as always, if you want to get in touch to leave any feedback, questions or comments you might have for us, you can contact us by email at info@studyclix.ie. You can also chat to us directly on the Studyclix website via the chat box in the bottom right hand corner.
Yes, and as always, don't forget to subscribe to the Studyclix podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay up to date with our latest episodes. If you want to support us, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or tell a friend about us so we can help as many students as possible.
And don't forget to follow Studyclix on social media if you're not already. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram and TikTok. We're always posting lots of fun stuff, lots of useful study tips and regular competitions, so it's well worth giving us a follow. And of course, a big thank you to Peter Tobin for working with us on this, for bringing his expert advice on the play Othello for Leaving Cert students. We hope you stay tuned for more.